The morning sun filtered through the windows of Riverside Animal Shelter, casting long shadows across the concrete floors. Emma pressed her nose against the cold glass as her parents discussed paperwork with the shelter director, Mrs. At 10 years old, Emma had learned to observe, to see what others overlooked. Her mother had promised a visit to select a pet, but something in Emma's chest told her this trip would mean so much more than a casual Saturday outing. Mrs., a weathered woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, led them down the corridor. The sounds grew louder, barks echoing off metal, whimpers of confusion, the shuffle of anxious paws on concrete. It was a symphony of loneliness that made Emma's heart ache. Countless dogs lined the shelter's cages, energetic puppies tumbling over themselves, medium-sized dogs pressing their faces against bars, older animals sleeping quietly in corners. Her father pointed toward an adorable golden retriever puppy, its coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her mother paused at a friendly-looking beagle that wagged its entire body with enthusiasm. But Emma's feet stopped moving. At the far end of the corridor, in a cage partially hidden in shadow, sat a dog unlike the others. He was a German Shepherd mix, perhaps 3 years old, his fawn and black coat matted and dull. But it was his eyes that froze Emma in place, eyes that seemed to contain stories of suffering, trust betrayed, and a hope so fragile it might shatter with one careless word. The dog didn't jump at the cage or bark for attention like the others. He sat motionless, watching her with an intensity that transcended the barrier between them. "That's Max," Mrs. said softly, noticing Emma's fixation. She approached the cage, her voice taking on a tone. "He came to us 8 months ago. We found him abandoned in a park, malnourished and injured. Someone had mistreated him terribly." Emma moved closer, her small hand reaching toward the cage. Mrs. gently touched her shoulder. "He's still unpredictable, sweetheart. He has behavioral issues from his trauma. Several families have tried to adopt him, but they returned him after a few days. They said he was too anxious, too withdrawn. He won't eat around strangers, refuses to play, and sometimes trembles without warning." Max's eyes followed Emma's every movement. He didn't approach the cage, didn't beg, didn't perform for her attention. He simply existed, acknowledging her presence with a gaze that seemed ancient and wise beyond his years. Emma felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition, almost, as if they'd been searching for each other across invisible distances. "Can I?" Emma hesitated, glancing back at her parents who were examining other dogs. "Can I sit with him?" Mrs. expression softened. "You can try, but move slowly. Don't make sudden movements." Emma sat on the cold floor beside Max's cage, cross-legged. She didn't attempt to touch him through the bars. Instead, she simply remained present, breathing slowly, thinking peaceful thoughts. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Max's breathing gradually slowed. The trembling in his muscular frame began to ease. Then, almost imperceptibly, he shifted closer to the cage, positioning himself nearer to Emma, not at the bars, but close enough that his presence felt less distant. Her parents eventually found her there, still sitting in silence, and her mother's first reaction was concern. "Emma, honey, come away from there. Mrs. said he can be unpredictable." "He's not unpredictable," Emma said quietly, not taking her eyes from Max. "He's scared, he's hurt, but there's something good in him, I can feel it." Her father exchanged a glance with her mother, that look parents give when their child says something that resonates deeper than logic. Emma's mother came and sat beside her daughter, observing Max through new eyes. The dog's presence was calmer now, less frenetic than the other shelter animals. There was a gentleness to him despite his intimidating size. "What would it take to foster him?" Emma asked, her voice steady with a conviction that surprised everyone present. Mrs., who'd been listening from a distance, approached them. "Are you sure? I won't lie to you, he has serious trust issues. He may never fully recover. The first few weeks could be challenging." "I'm sure," Emma said immediately. Her parents exchanged another look. this one containing hesitation, concern, and something that looked like respect for their daughter's determination. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's talk about it in the car." The car ride home was quiet except for Emma's steady voice explaining why they should foster Max. She spoke about second chances, about how people, and animals, sometimes needed someone to believe in them when no one else would. She talked about patience and love and how those things could heal almost anything. By the time they pulled into their driveway, her parents had agreed to a 2-week foster period. Emma knew with absolute certainty that 2 weeks would stretch into forever. The following Saturday, they returned to the shelter to bring Max home. He emerged from his cage cautiously, moving as if expecting punishment. Mrs. had warned them that the transition would take time, that Max might not eat, might hide, might demonstrate signs of anxiety or fear. Emma nodded, understanding that loving Max would require patience she'd need to dig deep to find. In the car, Emma sat in the back seat beside Max, not reaching for him but allowing their presence to acknowledge each other. The dog's breathing was rapid, his eyes wide. Emma spoke to him in soft, measured tones, narrating what they'd see, where they were going, assuring him that everything would be okay. She wasn't sure if Max understood her words, but she sensed he understood her tone, the gentleness, the promise, the absolute commitment in her voice. When they arrived home, Emma's parents prepared a quiet space in her room, a soft bed, a water bowl, and toys scattered without pressure. Emma sat on the floor and simply waited. Hours passed. Max remained in the corner, trembling slightly, assessing this new environment. Emma didn't force anything. She sat there doing homework, occasionally glancing toward him, breathing slowly. As the sun began to set, painting the room in golden light, something miraculous happened. Max's breathing began to match Emma's. His trembling eased, and for the first time, without any prompt or encouragement, Max took one tentative step toward her. Then another, until finally this wounded, broken dog rested his head against Emma's small shoulder. That was when Emma understood. This wasn't a 2-week foster arrangement. Max had chosen her, and she had chosen him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The first week tested Emma's resolve in ways she hadn't anticipated. Max arrived at their home carrying invisible chains forged from betrayal, pain, and the deep uncertainty of a creature who had learned that humans couldn't be trusted. Emma's bedroom became his sanctuary, a space where she attempted to rebuild the foundation of trust that trauma had shattered. Those early days were filled with setbacks that would have discouraged a less determined child. Max wouldn't eat from his bowl if anyone watched. He'd wait until the house fell silent, and everyone had retreated to other rooms before approaching the food, always positioned to maintain an escape route. Emma learned to leave the bowl and close the door, giving him the privacy and control he desperately needed. Sometimes the food remained untouched for hours, and Emma would find it still there in the morning. She never expressed frustration. Instead, she'd remove the bowl and try again at the next meal, understanding that Max's resistance wasn't defiance, it was survival. Sleep was another battle. Max wouldn't lie on the comfortable bed Emma had prepared for him. Instead, he'd position himself in the corner farthest from the door, pressed against the wall where he could see anyone entering. Emma recognized this instinct. She'd read extensively about trauma in animals. She stopped trying to coax him to the bed and instead began sleeping on the floor beside him, creating a barrier between Max and the door. Her mother initially objected, suggesting Emma move to her own bed, worried about her daughter's comfort, but Emma refused. "He needs to know someone will protect him," she explained simply. Night after night, Emma lay on the hardwood floor, sometimes for hours, before Max's breathing would shift from shallow anxiety to deeper, more peaceful rhythms. She'd lie there in the darkness, listening to him, sometimes hearing him whimper, sounds that suggested nightmares revisiting his past. On those nights, Emma would whisper soft affirmations into the darkness. "You're safe. I'm here. No one will hurt you anymore." The second week brought the first genuine breakthrough. Emma had developed a routine. She'd sit in her room reading or doing schoolwork, never initiating contact but remaining present. One afternoon, during a particularly quiet moment, she heard a sound that made her heart pause, Max's collar jingling as he moved. She didn't look up from her book, though every nerve in her body wanted to. From the corner of her eye, she noticed him creeping closer, step by cautious step, until finally his nose was near enough to smell her hand. She remained completely still, barely breathing. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Max extended his tongue and licked her hand. Just once. Just barely. But it was everything. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move, didn't celebrate too loudly, didn't break the fragile spell of this moment. She simply sat there, allowing Max to retreat if he needed to, but leaving her hand available should he want to approach again. He didn't, not that day. But the barrier had been crossed. A door that had seemed permanently sealed had cracked open. Encouraged by this small victory, Emma adjusted her approach. She began eating her meals in her room beside Max, allowing him to observe her eating from his bowl, showing him through her actions that food was safe, that humans who ate it didn't suffer consequences. She'd place small pieces of treat near her leg, not offering them directly but simply leaving them in her space. Sometimes Max would eat them after she left. Sometimes he wouldn't. But gradually, the pattern shifted. 3 weeks into his arrival, something shifted fundamentally. Emma had been preparing for her weekly dental appointment when Max approached her in the hallway, not cowering, not trembling, but walking with purpose. He pressed his head against her leg, and Emma's hands instinctively moved to gently stroke his ears. She felt the tension in his body release slightly, as if this touch had been something he'd been craving but was terrified to receive. "Mom, Dad, come here," she called, keeping her voice gentle and excited. When her parents appeared, they found Emma's hand resting on Max's head, and for the first time the dog remained in place, accepting their presence. Her mother's eyes glistened. Her father placed a tentative hand on Max's shoulder, and the dog didn't flinch. That evening they sat together as a family. Emma's mother spoke quietly about extending Max's foster period. "I think he needs more time than 2 weeks to truly settle," she said, looking at Emma's father. Emma held her breath, afraid to hope too much. Her father, who'd been skeptical about the entire endeavor, surprised everyone by agreeing immediately. "I think Emma's right about him," he said simply. "There's something special here." The following weeks witnessed a transformation so gradual that it was almost invisible day to day, yet undeniable when viewed across weeks. Max began playing tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Emma bought him toys, and she'd sit with him while he learned that objects existed for joy, not danger. She'd roll a tennis ball across the floor, and Max would chase it, his muscular body moving with increasing freedom. Those moments of play became sanctuary for both of them, places where past trauma couldn't intrude. By month 2, Max was eating heartily, his coat beginning to shine as proper nutrition and reduced stress worked their magic. He'd follow Emma through the house, no longer glued to her side in desperate fear, but maintaining a comfortable distance that spoke of trust mixed with lingering caution. He'd wait for her by the door when she left for school, greeting her return with a gentle wag rather than frantic anxiety. The night Emma's parents formally discussed making his foster care permanent, she was in her room when her mother entered with a gentle smile. "We'd like to make Max part of our family permanently," she said, "if that's what you want." Emma's response was immediate tears of joy. She ran to find Max and hugged him tightly, something she wouldn't have dared 3 months earlier, and felt him relax into her embrace, resting his head on her shoulder. In that moment, Emma understood something profound. They hadn't just saved Max, they'd saved each other. By month 3, as Emma watched Max chase butterflies in the backyard, his body moving with confidence and joy, she couldn't imagine life without him. The frightened, trembling dog from the shelter seemed like a different animal entirely, yet she recognized the same soul looking out from his eyes, just finally allowed to be whole again. The gymnasium was packed with students, teachers, and parents as principal stepped toward the microphone. It was the second Friday of the school year, and Emma sat in the bleachers beside her best friend Jasmine, half listening to announcements about fall fundraisers and upcoming field trips. She was mentally planning her afternoon. Max had recently begun showing anxiety during thunderstorms, and dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. She wanted to get home in time to create a safe space for him before the weather turned. Then Principal said something that made Emma's entire body go rigid. "We are proud to announce the inaugural Human-Animal Bond Competition, sponsored by the National Animal Welfare Foundation and judged by the renowned Dr." Emma's head snapped up. Jasmine grabbed her arm. Around the gymnasium, similar reactions rippled through the crowd, phones being pulled out, whispers breaking into excited chatter. "For those unfamiliar with Dr., the principal continued, he's an internationally recognized animal behaviorist and host of the television series Beyond Training, The Truth About Connection. This competition celebrates genuine, authentic bonds between humans and animals. It's not about fancy tricks or show-quality grooming. It's about real connection." Emma's heart began racing. This was exactly what she and Max had been building. Not performance, not training for competition, just genuine, authentic connection forged through patience and unconditional love. "The competition will take place in 6 weeks, Principal announced. "Students may enter with any animal companion, dogs, cats, rabbits, birds, horses. Registration deadline is 2 weeks from today. Winners will be featured on Doctor's television program and receive a college scholarship." The gymnasium erupted. Teachers had to call for order. Emma's mind was already spinning. She turned to Jasmine, whose dark eyes reflected excitement. "You should totally do this with Max," Jasmine said immediately. "You two are like magical together." That evening, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the competition. She researched Doctor obsessively, watching clips from his television show. He wasn't interested in elaborate training or perfect obedience. His show featured people with their animal companions, a blind woman with her guide dog, a veteran with PTSD working with his service horse, a child with autism communicating with her rabbit. Each episode focused on the transformative power of genuine connection. She showed clips to her parents after dinner. Her mother watched thoughtfully. Her father seemed skeptical. "Emma, I think it's wonderful that you want to do this, but let's be realistic about Max. He's still dealing with his past trauma. Competitions are stressful environments. There will be crowds, loud noises, strange dogs." "That's the whole point," Emma interrupted, her voice steady despite the nervousness fluttering in her chest. "We're not trying to prove Max is a trained show dog. We're proving that real connection transcends trauma. We're showing that rescue animals can bond just as deeply as any other dog." Her mother placed a hand over Emma's. "Sweetheart, what if Max has a panic attack during the competition? What if he doesn't respond the way you hope? Will you be disappointed?" Emma considered this carefully. "Yes, but I'll be more disappointed if I don't try. Max deserves a chance to show everyone what he's capable of, and I think people need to see that." Her parents exchanged one of their meaningful glances, the kind that seemed to contain entire conversations. Finally, her father nodded. "If you're sure, we'll support you. But this will require dedication, Emma. Training, socialization, preparation." "I know," Emma said immediately. "I'm ready." The following Monday, Emma submitted the registration form. She wrote in the comments section, "Max is a rescue dog who spent months in an animal shelter after suffering abuse and abandonment. This competition is about showing that genuine human-animal connection can heal even the deepest wounds." Word spread quickly through her school. By Tuesday, classmates were asking if she was really competing. The popular girls who owned a championship-bred golden doodle made snide comments about that weird shelter dog, not standing a chance against their professionally trained pets. Emma ignored them, but the comments planted seeds of doubt that whispered late at night when she couldn't sleep. She began researching the other competitors. There were dozens registered: a teenager with a horse trained in dressage, a boy with a parrot that performed tricks, a girl with 3 Pomeranians that had one dog show ribbons, professional handlers, experienced trainers, families with resources and expertise. And then there was Emma with Max, a rescue dog who still sometimes trembled at loud noises, who had behavioral scars from his past, who'd never been trained for anything beyond basic commands. That Friday evening, Emma sat in her room with Max's head on her lap, watching videos of previous animal competitions on her laptop. She clicked on a clip of Doctor judging a similar event. He walked the stage with quiet intensity, observing each competitor with penetrating focus. When a woman with a perfectly trained German Shepherd demonstrated complex obedience sequences, Doctor remained expressionless. But then a clip showed an elderly man with a deaf dog communicating through hand signals and subtle body movements. Doctor's expression transformed. He actually teared up. "Connection isn't about perfection," Doctor said in the footage. "It's about two beings understanding each other so completely that words become unnecessary. That's what I'm looking for." Emma's conviction. This was exactly what she and Max had. This was their story. The challenge, however, became immediately apparent. The first time Emma attempted to take Max to a public space for socialization, he panicked. They'd visited a local park where dogs were permitted, and within minutes of arriving, Max pressed against Emma's legs so hard she stumbled. The sound of children playing, other dogs barking, the general chaos of a busy Saturday afternoon sent him into a state of anxiety she hadn't witnessed in months. Emma sat on a bench with Max, breathing deeply, letting him hide his head against her thigh. Other people stared. A woman actually made a comment to her friend. "That dog looks vicious and unstable." Emma wanted to defend him. Instead, she simply remained present, helping Max through his panic attack, whispering reassurances, waiting until his breathing stabilized. When he finally calmed, she didn't force him to stay longer. They left the park, but not without determination. "We're going back next week," she told Max quietly, "and the week after, and we're going to show everyone what you're truly capable of." Over the following weeks, Emma developed a systematic socialization plan. She started with quieter parks, gradually introducing busier environments. She played recordings of crowd noises while they worked together in her room, helping Max associate noise with safety. She visited the competition venue twice, walking Max through the gymnasium, allowing him to experience the space without pressure. Her friends noticed the change in Emma. She was focused, determined, with a quiet confidence that hadn't existed before. Jasmine asked if Emma was nervous. Emma paused before answering, terrified, but Max is worth the risk. By week 5 of preparation, something remarkable happened. During a practice session in their backyard with background noise playing, Emma raised her hand, the subtle signal she developed with Max, and he responded with perfect synchronization. His movements were fluid, his focus absolute, his connection to Emma so evident that even her skeptical father, watching from the porch, stood and came closer. "That's something special," he whispered to Emma's mother. Emma felt it too. Something had shifted. They weren't just preparing for a competition. They were becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. And in just 1 week, the world would finally witness what she already knew, that a girl and her rescue dog possessed a bond that transcended anything most people had ever seen. The morning Emma began Max's formal preparation. She woke before dawn and sat on her porch with a notebook, outlining a training philosophy that was entirely her own. She'd rejected the traditional obedience manuals and YouTube tutorials featuring harsh commands and punishment-based techniques. Instead, she'd spent hours reading about canine psychology, trauma recovery, and the concept of gentle leadership, the idea that true connection didn't require dominance, but rather mutual respect and understanding. The first principle Emma established was this: she wouldn't train Max, she would communicate with him. Week 1 of preparation focused entirely on observation. Emma spent hours simply watching Max in different environments, documenting his natural responses, his comfort levels, his instinctive behaviors. She noticed that he tilted his head slightly when responding to gentle tones. She observed that his tail wagged in a specific pattern when he felt secure. She recognized the subtle shift in his ear position that preceded anxiety. She was learning his language as thoroughly as he was learning hers. Communication is a two-way street, she explained to Jasmine one afternoon as they sat in Emma's backyard watching Max navigate the space. Most training assumes the human speaks and the dog listens, but Max and I are creating something different. We're learning to speak to each other. Jasmine watched as Emma raised two fingers in a subtle gesture, and Max immediately shifted his position on the grass, his body language changing to reflect calm alertness. "That's incredible," Jasmine breathed. "How did you teach him to do that?" "I didn't teach him," Emma explained. "I noticed he naturally moves that way when he's feeling confident but not overstimulated. I just paired that natural behavior with a signal. Now he understands that when I make that gesture, I'm asking him to find that feeling within himself." The second week introduced what Emma called intention work. She'd sit with Max and practice projecting specific emotional states. Before their training sessions, Emma would meditate, grounding herself in calmness and purpose. She'd read that animals possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense human emotional states through pheromones and subtle body language cues. If she approached training sessions anxious or frustrated, Max would absorb that energy. So Emma trained herself as much as she trained Max. She downloaded meditation apps. She practiced breathing exercises. She learned to calm her nervous system before every interaction with Max. Her mother noticed the change. Emma seemed more centered, more peaceful. "You're handling a lot of pressure," her mother said one evening. "Are you sure you want to continue with this competition?" "More than anything," Emma replied firmly. "But not for the competition, for Max, for us." By week 3, they'd established their first complex communication sequence. Emma developed a series of hand signals, not commands in the traditional sense, but invitations for Max to access specific emotional states. A upward palm meant feel confident. A gentle downward motion meant find peace. A circular gesture meant let's play. Each signal connected to something Max naturally possessed, and Emma was simply helping him recognize and access those states on demand. The breakthrough came during the 4th week. Emma had been working with Max on what she called synchronized movement, moving together as a unified being rather than handler and pet. They'd practice walking side by side, turning when the other turned, stopping when the other stopped. At first, it required conscious effort, but gradually their movements became automatic, as if they shared one nervous system between them. One afternoon, Emma's father watched from the kitchen window as Emma and Max moved through their backyard in perfect synchronization. They'd walk 10 paces, then Emma would turn and Max would turn simultaneously, without any visible signal. They'd stop, and both would become still at the exact same moment. Her father came outside, visibly moved. "How are you doing that?" he asked. "I don't know exactly," Emma admitted. "It's like we're thinking the same thing at the same time, like we're connected deeper than words or even signals." Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's love, Emma. That's what genuine connection looks like." Week 5 introduced environmental challenges. Emma began taking Max to increasingly stimulating public spaces, but instead of exposing him to chaos suddenly, she used a method she developed called graduated immersion. They'd arrive at busy locations during their quietest hours, early mornings or late afternoons. They'd start at the perimeter, gradually moving closer to activity. Max learned that crowds weren't threats but simply collections of individuals going about their lives. The key was Emma's unwavering calm presence. No matter how anxious Max became, Emma maintained steady breathing, gentle body language, and absolute confidence in his ability to handle the situation. She never rushed him, never forced him deeper into discomfort than he could manage. But she consistently encouraged him to push just slightly beyond his comfort zone, the psychological sweet spot where growth occurred. By week 6, Max could navigate a moderately busy park without significant anxiety. The trembling that once accompanied crowds had diminished dramatically. More importantly, Emma noticed that Max now looked to her during uncertain moments, not as a desperate creature seeking rescue, but as a partner seeking guidance. It was the difference between desperate dependence and secure attachment. Week 7 brought the introduction of the performance space. Emma had arranged with the school's athletic director to use the gymnasium during off hours. She and Max spent hours familiarizing themselves with the vast, echoing space. The wooden floor that looked so enormous during assemblies became, through repetition, simply another environment they navigated together. Emma designed a routine that wasn't about impressive tricks, but about demonstrating their connection. They'd move through simple patterns, circles, figure eights, synchronized stops and starts. They'd practice the raised hand signal that had become their signature. They'd demonstrate the subtle communication that existed between them. Emma wanted judges to see not a trained dog executing commands, but a rescue animal who'd healed enough to trust deeply, and a girl who'd learned the language of unconditional patience. The physical changes in Max were undeniable. His coat, once dull and matted, now gleamed with health and vitality. His muscular structure, which had been hidden beneath tension and anxiety, became visible as he moved with confidence. But the most dramatic transformation was in his eyes. The haunted quality that had characterized his shelter appearance had given way to bright intelligence and peaceful contentment. Week 8 brought the final intensive preparations. Emma refined every gesture, every movement, every transition in their routine. Neighbors would gather on their porches to watch. Something about the girl and dog moving together with such perfect synchronization mesmerized everyone who witnessed it. One evening, as they practiced under the fading sunlight, Emma's mother stood beside her father in their driveway, tears streaming down her face. "I still can't believe the difference," she whispered. "Not just in Max, in Emma." Her father nodded silently, watching his daughter and her dog move through their routine with the kind of harmony that seemed to defy explanation. "She's become something special," he said quietly. "They both have." The night before the competition, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed with Max, her hand resting on his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. She'd trained him as much as she could. Now it came down to connection, the invisible thread that bound them together, stronger than any command, more powerful than any formal training. "Tomorrow," she whispered to Max, "we show them what we've discovered together. We show them that healing is possible. We show them that rescue animals deserve a chance. We show them us." Max's tail thumped softly against the bed. One small gesture that contained all the understanding, trust, and love they'd built together over the past 8 months. Emma finally fell asleep, her hand never leaving his side. Emma woke at 5 in the morning, her stomach twisted into impossible knots. The competition would begin at 10. She had 5 hours to prepare herself and Max, to calm the tornado of anxiety swirling through her chest, to transform her nervousness into grounded confidence. She moved quietly through the house, not wanting to wake her parents yet, and found Max already awake, watching her from his bed with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to contain ancient wisdom. "Today's the day," she whispered, sitting beside him and burying her face in his fur. "We've trained for this. We're ready." But was she? That was the question that plagued her as she showered and dressed in the simple but elegant outfit she'd selected weeks ago, dark jeans and a soft blue blouse that matched Max's collar. She wanted to look polished but authentic, prepared but not overdone. Looking at herself in the mirror, Emma barely recognized the girl staring back. She looked older somehow, more serious, carrying a weight that went beyond a single competition. Her parents had already begun their morning routine by the time she emerged from her room. Her mother took one look at Emma's face and pulled her into a tight hug. "Nervous?" she asked gently. "Terrified," Emma admitted. "What if we mess up? What if Max freezes? What if everyone else is so much better than us? Her father joined them in the kitchen, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. Then you'll know you gave it everything you had. That's all any of us can do. Breakfast was quiet. Emma picked a toast without tasting it. Max ate his meal steadily, seemingly unaffected by the momentous nature of the day. Emma is calm. At 8:30, they began the drive to Lincoln High School, where the competition would be held in the auditorium. The venue had been switched from their middle school due to the overwhelming number of registrations. Over 300 participants had signed up, 300 people with their beloved animals, all believing they possessed something special. The parking lot was already chaos when they arrived. Vehicles lined every available space, and families with their animal companions moved toward the entrance in a stream of nervous energy. Emma glimpsed them. A girl with a perfectly groomed show horse being led by professionals, a boy with an African parrot perched on an elaborate stand, teenagers with champion-bred dogs wearing custom harnesses and leashes. Emma's hands trembled as she clipped Max's leash. He was groomed impeccably, his coat brushed until it gleamed, his collar cleaned and polished, but he still looked like what he was: a rescue dog, a survivor, a being who carried his history in the set of his shoulders and the careful way he moved through the world. "Come on, buddy," she whispered, and together they walked toward the auditorium. Inside, the energy was electric and overwhelming. Hundreds of competitors milled about in the holding area, creating a cacophony of sounds that made Emma's head spin. Dogs barked. Owners shouted instructions. Children ran between booths. The ceiling seemed to close in, and Emma felt Max's body press closer to her leg. She knelt beside him, placing both hands on his shoulders, looking directly into his eyes. "I know," she said softly. "It's a lot, but we've done harder things. Remember that park with all the kids playing? Remember when we practiced in the thunderstorm? You're stronger than this noise. You're brave. I believe in you." Max's breathing gradually steadied. He didn't relax completely, but his rigid posture softened slightly. Emma felt a surge of gratitude for the months of preparation. Without that foundation, Max would have been completely undone by this environment. They were directed to a waiting area for their category, dogs under 50 pounds. Emma found a relatively quiet corner and sat beside Max, reviewing her mental checklist one final time. Hand signals, breathing control, the routine they'd practiced hundreds of times. She closed her eyes and practiced the meditation technique she'd learned, centering herself in calmness and purpose. When she opened her eyes 30 minutes later, the competition was beginning. Announcements echoed through the auditorium. Judges were introduced, 3 of them, including the star himself. Dr. Emma caught glimpses of him on the monitors. A distinguished man in his 60s with intelligent eyes and a bearing that commanded respect. He moved through the competition with methodical observation, sometimes leaning in close to watch a particular animal, sometimes stepping back to observe from distance. The other competitors began their routines. A professional handler demonstrated an off-leash German Shepherd executing military precision obedience sequences. The crowd erupted in applause. A teenage girl with 3 Pomeranians performed an elaborate dance routine set to music. The judges nodded appreciatively. A boy with a parrot presented the bird mimicking human speech and performing tricks. Impressive, polished, professional. Emma felt her confidence crack slightly. These competitors had resources, training, experience. Max and she had, 8 months together, an improvised training philosophy, a rescue dog with emotional baggage. Number 247, an announcer called Emma's number. Her heart stopped. Her mouth went dry. She looked at Max, whose ears had perked up at the sound of his leash being gently tugged. It was happening. There was no more time for doubt, no more time for preparation. It was time to show the world what they'd built together. Emma stood on shaky legs and walked toward the entrance to the competition arena. As they emerged into the spotlight, the auditorium seemed impossibly large. Hundreds of faces stared down from the bleachers. The judges sat at a long table, their expressions professionally neutral. The bright lights made Emma momentarily blind. She could feel Max's anxiety spiking through the leash. They approached the competition floor, a marked rectangular space in the center of the auditorium. Emma took a deep breath and released the leash. Max immediately moved closer to her side, seeking the security of her presence. She placed her hand on his head, grounding both of them. For a moment, they simply stood there. Emma could feel hundreds of eyes assessing them. She heard whispers. Someone laughed, a sound that cut through Emma like a blade. She was acutely aware that they looked out of place here, among the polished competitors with their professional setups and trained routines. But then Emma made a choice. She stopped looking at the judges. She stopped hearing the crowd. She focused entirely on Max, on the invisible thread connecting them, on the journey they'd traveled together. She began to move, and Max moved with her, a slow, graceful circle, their movements synchronized as if choreographed by a single consciousness. They stopped. Emma raised her hand in their signature gesture. Max shifted into the confident alertness that the signal represented. They moved through the figure-8 pattern they'd practiced countless times. Max's focus on Emma was absolute, his anxiety secondary to his commitment to their connection. The auditorium had gone completely silent. Emma could feel the shift in attention, the way the energy in the room had changed from admiring appreciation to something deeper, genuine recognition of something authentic occurring before them. They moved through their entire routine, nothing flashy, nothing requiring extreme training, just two beings demonstrating a connection so genuine, so palpable, that it seemed to fill the entire arena. When they finished, Emma took Max's head in her hands and simply stood with him, breathing together, present together. The auditorium remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly applause began. It grew from scattered claps to thunderous ovation. But what captured Emma's attention most was the judge's table. Doctor was leaning forward, his expression transformed. His hand was over his heart. His eyes were glistening with tears. The applause faded gradually, and the auditorium settled back into expectant silence. Emma had completed their prepared routine, but she could feel something more waiting beneath the surface, something neither she nor Max had formally rehearsed, but that existed in the deep well of their connection. She made a split-second decision that would alter the trajectory of this entire competition. Instead of leaving the arena, Emma remained in the center with Max. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, centering herself in the profound calm she'd cultivated over months of meditation and practice. When she opened her eyes again, they were focused entirely on Max, and she raised her hand in a new gesture, not the signals they'd worked with, but something spontaneous and intuitive. What happened next? Explanation. Max began to move in a way that seemed choreographed by an invisible force. He spun gracefully in a perfect circle, his muscular body flowing like water, his movements carrying an elegance that seemed impossible for a rescue dog with no formal training. But it wasn't the movement itself that captured everyone's attention. It was the absolute synchronization between Emma and Max's actions. As if reading her mind before she even moved, Max would position himself exactly where Emma was about to step. When she turned, he turned. When she stopped, he stopped, simultaneously, not a fraction of a second off. The auditorium had gone utterly silent. Even the background noise of rustling programs and whispered conversations ceased. 300 people held their collective breath, witnessing something that transcended typical animal competition. Emma raised her hand higher, a gesture inviting Max to rise to his full height. Without hesitation, Max executed a perfect play bow, his front legs extended, his rear end elevated, his gaze locked on Emma's face with an intensity that seemed to contain the entirety of their journey together. Then, in a movement that made several audience members gasp audibly, Max gently took Emma's extended hand in his mouth, not biting, not gripping, but holding it with infinite gentleness, as if he were protecting something infinitely precious. At the judge's table, Doctor stood abruptly, his pen falling from his hand. His eyes were fixed on Emma and Max with an expression of stunned wonder that was visible even from the arena floor. The other two judges exchanged glances of bewilderment. They'd seen impressive performances throughout the morning, but nothing that registered on this scale of authenticity. Emma felt tears beginning to stream down her face. This wasn't about the competition anymore. This was about witnessing the complete transformation of a being who'd been broken, abandoned, deemed untrainable by professionals. This was about proving that love, patience, and unconditional acceptance could heal wounds that seemed irreparable. This was about two souls recognizing each other across the barrier of species and saying, "I choose you. I trust you. I am forever changed by you." Max released her hand gently and moved into a sitting position directly in front of her, his body completely relaxed, his eyes conveying a peace that spoke volumes. Emma knelt beside him, embracing him without restraint, and Max pressed his head against her shoulder. The same gesture he'd made that first night in her room, but now carrying months of healing and genuine connection. The auditorium erupted. It started with a single person standing, a woman in the third row who was visibly crying. Then another person stood, and another. Within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, applause thundering through the arena like a physical force. Some people were openly weeping. Parents held their children closer, understanding they were witnessing something profoundly moving. But Emma barely noticed. She remained in the center of the arena, holding Max, completely immersed in their shared moment. When she finally looked up, her eyes found Doctor at the judge's table. He was standing, his hands pressed together, tears streaming openly down his face. He wasn't clapping. He was simply standing there, completely transfixed, looking at Emma and Max with an expression of pure, undeniable recognition. The applause gradually subsided as the announcer gestured for the next competitor to prepare. Emma stood, and Max rose beside her, their movements still synchronized. As they walked from the arena toward the exit, Emma felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes following them. People in the bleachers called out, not judges offering critique, but genuine human beings moved by what they'd witnessed. "That was beautiful," someone shouted. "Beautiful dog," another voice called. "Beautiful connection," a third voice added. Emma walked through the exit with Max, her legs shaking from the emotional intensity of the experience. She found her parents waiting in the holding area, and her mother immediately pulled her into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have words," her mother whispered into Emma's hair. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." Her father stood beside them, his own eyes glistening, his hand on Emma's shoulder. "You two did something extraordinary in there," he said quietly. "I don't know how else to describe it." Emma found a quiet corner with Max and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. Max immediately curled beside her, his head resting on her lap. Her hands trembled as she stroked his fur, processing what had just happened. She'd been so focused on performing the routine they'd prepared that when the spontaneous moment arrived, she'd simply followed her instincts, and Max had followed hers in return. That was when a woman in an official competition coordinator vest approached them. "Emma," she said gently, "Doctor would like to speak with you and Max in his private meeting room after the competition concludes." Emma's heart began racing again. The coordinator handed her a card with a room number and disappeared back into the auditorium before Emma could respond. She looked at Max, whose calm brown eyes seemed to suggest that whatever came next would be exactly as it should be. The remaining hours of competition passed in a blur. Emma watched other performers, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the moments on stage, analyzing every gesture, every movement, every perfect synchronization with Max. When she'd raised her hand in that spontaneous gesture, something had shifted, not just in her and Max, but in the entire room. She'd felt it in the quality of the silence, in the collective gasp of the crowd, in the judge's sudden shift from detached observation to genuine emotional investment. At 3 o'clock, after all competitors had finished, the announcer called for the judges' deliberation. Emma and Max were escorted to a private waiting room, a quiet space far removed from the chaotic energy of the main arena. Her parents sat with them, but no one spoke much. There was a sacredness to the silence, as if breaking it might somehow diminish what had occurred. An hour passed. Then, too, Emma began to wonder if something had gone wrong. Maybe the judges were disappointed when they reviewed the footage. Maybe the spontaneity that had felt so right in the moment had looked chaotic or unprofessional from the judge's perspective. But then the door opened, and a staff member entered with a simple message. "The judges would like to see you now." Emma's hands shook as she clipped Max's leash. Her parents stood as well, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be significant. Together, they made their way back toward the judges' area, Emma's heart pounding so intensely she thought it might burst from her chest. Doctor was waiting for them, and his expression was unlike anything Emma had anticipated. Doctor stood at the edge of the stage, but he wasn't alone. The other two judges flanked him, and behind them stood several competition organizers and what appeared to be camera crew members, their equipment suggesting this conversation would be documented. Emma's stomach clenched with uncertainty. Was this about disqualification? Had she violated some rule by performing unrehearsed movements? Doctor's eyes locked with Emma's, and she saw in them a combination of intensity and emotion that made her knees weak. He stepped down from the stage and approached her directly, moving with deliberate slowness. Max, sensing the significance of the moment, pressed closer to Emma's side but didn't display anxiety. Instead, he seemed to recognize something in Doctor's energy, a fellow believer in the power of human-animal connection. "Emma," Doctor said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of professional experience, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me with complete honesty. When you and Max were on that stage during that final sequence, what were you thinking?" Emma's mind raced through possible answers. The truth seemed too simple, too abstract to articulate, but she'd learned over the past 8 months that honesty was the foundation of genuine connection. "I was thinking about Max," she said quietly, "about his journey, about how he was abandoned and hurt and how he chose to trust me anyway. I was thinking about how brave he is, how strong. I wasn't thinking about the competition or the judges or the crowd. I was just present with him." Doctor's eyes glistened with fresh tears. He looked at his colleagues, then back at Emma. "Do you understand what you demonstrated out there?" he asked. "In my 23 years of studying human-animal bonds, I have never, and I mean never, witnessed such an authentic, pure, undiluted connection between two beings from different species." Emma felt her parents move closer, their presence grounding her as the significance of his words began to sink in. "That wasn't training," Doctor continued, his voice growing stronger. "That wasn't choreography. That wasn't performance. What I witnessed was something far more profound. Two souls who have healed each other, communicating on a level that most humans spend their entire lives trying to achieve with other humans." He turned to address the gathered crowd, the competition organizers, the media representatives, his fellow judges. "I've been deliberating with my colleagues, and we need to discuss something that hasn't occurred in the history of this competition." He paused, creating a moment of suspense that seemed to stretch endlessly. "The rules of this competition state that winners are determined by demonstrating the strongest human-animal bond, authentic connection, and the transformative power of that relationship. It also states that judges maintain the authority to make decisions that prioritize the spirit of competition over technical scores." Emma held her breath. Beside her, Max was completely calm, his head tilted slightly as if listening to Doctor's words with understanding. "I am going to do something that will likely be controversial," Doctor announced. "I am disqualifying the current highest-scoring competitors." A collective gasp erupted from the gathered crowd. One of the competition organizers actually stepped forward. "Doctor, that's unprecedented. We can't." "You can," Doctor interrupted firmly, "and I am. I am exercising my authority as head judge to make a decision based on the principles this competition was founded upon." He turned back to Emma. "The competitors I'm disqualifying have performed impressive routines. Their animals are undoubtedly well trained, but they demonstrated something this competition was never meant to celebrate: obedience, performance, the domination of one being's will over another's." Emma's mother squeezed her shoulder, sensing where this was heading. "Emma," Doctor said, focusing entirely on her, "what you and Max have created together isn't about domination or training or performance standards. It's about healing. It's about two wounded beings recognizing each other and choosing to rebuild their lives together. It's about a girl who saw past a dog's trauma to the soul beneath. It's about a rescue animal who was deemed untrainable by professionals but who trusted a child enough to become extraordinary." He gestured toward Max, and the dog met his gaze with absolute composure. This dog should have been euthanized in many shelters. He was considered dangerous, unstable, too traumatized to recover. But Emma believed in him, and look what that belief created. Doctor walked closer to Max and extended his hand slowly. Max sniffed it gently, then pressed his head against the man's palm, a gesture of recognition and acceptance. Doctor's face transformed completely. He looked like he might break down entirely. "I am declaring Emma and Max the winners of this competition," he announced formally. "Not because they performed the best tricks, not because they demonstrated the most training, but because they demonstrated what this competition was always meant to celebrate: the transformative, healing power of genuine connection between species." The auditorium erupted, not with the polite applause from earlier, but with emotional, thundering recognition. People were crying. Standing ovations began spontaneously. Emma felt her own tears streaming down her face as her parents embraced her. But Doctor wasn't finished. "There's something else," he said, waiting for the applause to subside. "I have a platform, a television program called Beyond Training. For 15 years, I've been showcasing animal-human bonds from across the country, but I've never featured a story like this one." He looked directly at Emma with an intensity that seemed to penetrate her very soul. "Emma, I would like to invite you and Max to be the focus of a special episode on my show. We document your story, Max's rescue, your journey together, the months of healing and connection building. I believe your story could change how people understand rescue animals, trauma recovery, and the power of unconditional love." Emma's legs felt weak. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Really?" "Really," Doctor confirmed. "But more than that, I'd like to discuss establishing a scholarship program in your name, the Emma and Max Foundation for Rescue Animal Advocacy and Education. I believe your journey deserves to inspire others." Emma's father placed his arm around her shoulders, his eyes glistening with pride. Her mother was openly crying, her hand over her mouth in shock. The other two judges approached, and one of them, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, knelt beside Max and hugged him. "Thank you for reminding us why we do this," she whispered. As the moment continued to unfold, Emma realized something profound. They hadn't just won a competition. They'd done something far more significant. They'd witnessed the power of their authentic connection, moving people to reconsider their entire understanding of rescue animals, trauma, healing, and love. Max leaned against Emma's leg, his presence steady and grounding. She understood then that this was just the beginning. The real journey, the one that would impact thousands of lives, was only starting to unfold. 6 months after the competition, Emma sat in a television studio for the third time that week, watching the crew prepare for the tapping of Doctor's special episode about her and Max. The studio was sleek and modern, filled with professional cameras and lighting equipment. But what struck Emma most was the energy in the room, a palpable sense of anticipation, as if everyone understood they were about to document something meaningful. Doctor approached her with his characteristic warmth, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked. "This episode is going to air nationally. It will reach millions of people." Emma glanced at Max, who was lying calmly on a cushion beside her, seemingly unbothered by the chaos of production. "We're ready," she said with the quiet confidence she'd developed over the past months. The episode aired on a Tuesday evening in late May. By Wednesday morning, the response was overwhelming. Doctors' producers reported that the network had received over 50,000 emails from viewers. News outlets picked up the story. The Emma and Max hashtag trended on social media for 3 consecutive days. Emma's inbox and her parents' inbox flooded with messages from across the country. But what moved Emma most weren't the viral moments or the media attention. It was the personal stories from individuals whose lives had been touched by what she and Max represented. A woman from Oregon wrote about how she'd been planning to euthanize her rescue dog after 6 months of behavioral issues. Watching Emma and Max's story, she decided to try patience instead of punishment. 6 months later, that dog had become her emotional support animal, helping her navigate her anxiety disorder. A man from Texas described how he'd been struggling with severe PTSD after military service. He watched the episode and decided to adopt a rescue dog from a shelter. Within weeks, that dog had become his partner in healing, just as Max had been for Emma. He credited her story with saving his life. A teenager in New York, bullied for her appearance and social awkwardness, reached out to say that watching Emma's quiet determination and unconditional acceptance of Max had inspired her to be kinder to herself. She'd started volunteering at an animal shelter and discovered a community of people who understood her in ways her school peers never had. Stories poured in, hundreds of them, then thousands. Stories about rescued animals finding homes because families were inspired by Emma and Max. Stories about people discovering their life's purpose through animal advocacy. Stories about healing, second chances, and the transformative power of believing in someone when no one else would. 3 weeks after the episode aired, Emma received an official invitation from the American Kennel Club to serve as a youth ambassador for rescue animal advocacy. The invitation came with a speaking engagement at their annual national conference. Emma, who'd never spoken publicly before the competition, found herself standing in front of rooms filled with professional handlers, breeders, and animal welfare advocates, sharing her story. "When I first met Max, he was considered broken," she told an auditorium of 300 people at the conference. "Professionals had labeled him untrainable, unstable, and unsuitable for adoption. But what I learned is that rescue animals aren't broken, they're just waiting for someone to believe in them. Max didn't need fancy training. He needed patience. He needed presence. He needed someone to say, 'I see you. I believe in you. I'm not giving up on you.'" That's when the real transformation began. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her, many with tears in their eyes, sharing their own rescue animal stories, their own experiences with healing through connection. But perhaps the most significant development came 3 months after the episode aired. The Emma and Max Foundation officially launched, with funding from Dr. and several prominent animal welfare organizations. The foundation's mission was threefold: to provide education about rescue animal adoption and trauma recovery, to offer financial assistance to families adopting rescue animals, and to fund research into the therapeutic benefits of human-animal bonds. Emma, at just 11 years old, became the youngest founding board member of a national animal welfare organization. Her parents worried about the responsibility, but Emma approached it with the same quiet determination she'd brought to training Max. "I want to help other rescue animals find homes like Max did," she explained to her parents. "And I want to help people understand that these animals have so much love to give, even if they've been hurt." By the end of the first year, the foundation had helped over 200 families adopt rescue animals through subsidized adoption programs and provided educational workshops in 43 states. Rescue shelters reported significant increases in adoption rates, particularly for dogs with behavioral or emotional trauma histories. Emma received letters from families describing how their adopted rescue dogs had transformed their lives, exactly as Max had transformed hers. Emma and Max became fixtures at animal shelters across the country. They'd visit during adoption events, allowing potential adopters to interact with a former shelter dog who'd become extraordinary. The impact was immediate and measurable. Shelters that hosted their visits reported 3 times the normal adoption rate for that day. On quiet evenings at home, Emma would sit with Max in their backyard, the same backyard where they'd spent countless hours training and connecting. Max was now 5 years old, his coat completely gray around his muzzle, his movements sometimes slower due to age, but his spirit undiminished. Emma would reflect on the journey they'd taken together. "Do you realize what we've done?" she'd whisper to Max, running her fingers through his familiar fur. "We were just a girl and a rescue dog. We didn't know we were going to change anything, but we did." Max would respond by resting his head on her lap, his presence a grounding reminder that their greatest achievement wasn't the competition they'd won or the fame they'd acquired. It was the quiet, consistent choice they'd both made, day after day, to believe in each other. Emma's mother documented much of this journey in a book she was writing about her daughter's experience. Publishers had approached them about creating a memoir, but Emma had insisted that the focus remain on rescue animals and human-animal connection, not on her personal fame. "This story isn't about me being special," she'd insisted to her publisher. "It's about how any of us can be special if we're willing to give our time, patience, and love to something that needs it." By age 14, Emma had spoken at over 100 schools, appeared on numerous television programs beyond Dr. Show, and received recognition from animal welfare organizations across the globe. She was nominated for a National Youth Leadership Award, and her story was being studied in animal psychology and trauma recovery programs at several universities. But the greatest rewards came in simpler forms. A letter from a woman who'd adopted a rescue dog and was inspired to leave an abusive relationship, finding strength in her dog's resilience. A child who'd learned to read by practicing with shelter dogs, discovering confidence through interaction with animals. An elderly man who'd adopted a senior rescue dog and found companionship that extended his life by years, according to his family. On quiet nights, when Emma reflected on everything that had happened since that day at the shelter when she first saw Max's haunted eyes, she understood something profound. Their connection hadn't just saved Max. It had saved countless other animals by inspiring people to see rescue animals differently. It had saved people by showing them the healing power of unconditional love. Emma and Max had become symbols of hope, proof that trauma could be healed, that second chances mattered, that love transcended the boundaries of species, and that sometimes the most extraordinary achievements come not from pursuing greatness, but from simply choosing to show up with patience, presence, and unconditional belief in another being. As Emma prepared for her 10th anniversary appearance on Dr. Show, now a special documentary about the Foundation's decade-long impact, she sat with Max one final time in their backyard. Her hand rested on his aging chest, feeling the steady heartbeat that had become as familiar to her as her own pulse. "We did it, buddy," she whispered, "not just for us, for all of them." Max's tail thumped softly against the ground, a final affirmation of the bond that had started as rescue and had become redemption, for both of them, and for thousands of others whose lives had been forever changed by believing in the power of love. The end.